Mm, mm. Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, Season 1. It does become quite a different show in Season 2, and I just began Season 2 and decided to pause now to do a short vlog about Buck Rogers Season 1. There's a lot of great stuff in Buck Rogers Season 1. You have the continuity of an old classic hero in Buck Rogers being revived for modern, at the time, consumption. Having him frozen in the not so distant future of 1987 to reawaken 500 years later is a great way of recycling a character in a continuity. I mean, there's a sort of a Captain America ploy there that he should be frozen for that period of time. So we literally get the Buck Rogers that our grandparents knew from comic strips, but he's still alive and it's the future now. Um, I really like the setup for Buck Rogers. You have the post-nuclear Holocaust world has rebuilt. We've got all the fancy technology and the ships that are the staples of science fiction. But you sort of have this positive humanity emerging from this nuclear destruction in a way that Star Trek had alluded to, and that Buck Rogers is really driving home the remains of the planet, the ruins, the little area called Anarchia under the city where some humans are still living like animals. It is at the same time darker than Star Trek in that regards, but also positive, like Star Trek would be, in showing human beings emerging from this and building something new. Having all the stargates and access to different parts of the universe, as they say, it allows for an infinite number of storylines. It allows you to be experiencing all the dangers and adventures of strange new worlds without having to have a ship traveling through space, per se. Now, the downside of that is clearly there's a recycling over and over again of several basic storylines where the whole universe has made their oyster, but it's not clear they know what to do with that. All the basic science fiction-y stuff is there, but the really forward-thinking, unusual stuff that would be original seems to not be there. Roller disco, popular at the time, makes its appearance. Rock and roll, teenage rebellion makes its appearance. And there's a number of things that, all in all, don't make bad episodes, but could have been better, and there could have been a lot more. Now, with season 2, without getting too far into it, rather than getting better writers to break the rut, they tried to change the whole setup and put them on a ship, and now they're looking for lost human tribes out in space. And so now you're even more like, put people on a ship and send them out to explore, like Star Trek or kind of Battlestar Galactica, looking for human tribes, just grasping at straws to try to give something new to it because of their failure to get better storylines. So really the setup, and I mean, I worry about the talk of a reboot, as I do with anything these days, because everything is so infested with god-awful wokeness of our era. I'm not sure that it would be good. But thinking of the great Battlestar Galactica reboot we got in the early 21st century, we could potentially have a great Buck Rogers. The setup is right, and more people are more accustomed now with some things that are science fiction-y to be able to do some real sci-fi stories based around that setup of the recovering Earth, the Stargates, the Starfighters, the different groups of people they meet. My final analysis, I'd have to say two things that it majorly got wrong. One is that the show never seems to decide whether it wants to be geared at children or adults. They slip in adult themes, things that went over my head when I was a kid watching it. And maybe they're trying to be that show that appeals to both age groups, or that everybody watches together and appreciates at different levels. But they don't get there. They don't. There's not enough in it. The adults watching Buck Rogers at the time that it aired, and the show that we were given, were people that were watching it with their kids to appease their kids, or they were sci-fi nerds who were so desperate to see sci-fi on TV or on any screen in a culture that was starved for it, any good sci-fi, that they were watching it. There's really not enough in it to be very appealing to adults. It does end up being aimed at kids, but sort of sloppily in some places because of some of the failed attempts to draw in adult themes. The major thing that I actually think the show got right was a reflection on human nature, whereas Star Trek takes far too positive a view of human nature and tries to put them in conflict with peoples in space that represent earlier stages of our development. Almost everybody on Buck Rogers, the villains and everybody, are human. As a child, I didn't catch on to that, honestly. I always assumed the Draconians were aliens, even though they look human. But I grew up on Star Trek with the Klingons had a mustache, and Michael Ansara returning to be Kane, not Captain Kane, Kane with an E, not a G. So Klingon Captain Kane becomes Draconian Kane, but nevertheless, I just assumed they were aliens, but they're not. They're not, and any reasonable depth of viewing, you catch on that somewhere these branches of humanity broke off. This is why the Draconians are, the one goofy episode, are required to mate with a human of genetic purity. So this has something to do with post-Holocaust and people moving out into the universe. We see a couple of alien races, but for the most part in season 1, humans on various colony planets who are living almost alien lifestyles in the distant future are the major protagonists and antagonists. The other fascinating part about that is it's not overwhelmingly positive than about human nature. It's realistic. The Draconians are sort of gray. They're kind of hostile at the beginning, and then it's not so clear. The end of season 1, they kind of make up, and you can tell they were almost thinking that the series might end then, perhaps, and we're wrapping it up a little bit. But we find human beings doing things like trafficking in slaves, sex slaves, gambling casinos in the future where mafia bosses can just keep you captive if you're a beautiful woman. These are horrible trafficking and slavery type of things, and the humans are kind of puzzled with, well, what's slavery? Oh, so it's bad that they're owning each other. Oh, because human nature being human nature, and all these centuries in the future, we keep rediscovering these negative things about ourselves and about the universe and about things that we can do, and have to learn it all over again, which is really authentically the truth about human nature, rather than the perpetually positive view that at least originally Star Trek was meant to convey. The optimism of that has its place, but Buck Rogers, again, in a more adult, a la 21st century reboot Battlestar Galactica, if you did a Buck Rogers that was done right like that, all of those elements are there to be really, really good. It just doesn't quite make it. I mean, I enjoyed it. I loved watching it. I'll probably watch it again someday in the future. But in this last couple of years, I've been binging old shows sort of in a row. Definitely worthwhile to watch, but you see the ways in which it could have been made better. Anyway, so that is Buck Rogers in the 25th Century Season 1. As I get through, and it's not a very long season, I think 13 episodes. At the end of Season 2, I'll do a brief analysis of that as well. Live long and prosper.